There's a difference between being someone's real choice and being someone's option, and if you've ever loved an avoidant, you already know that difference is never simple. Avoidants don't love the way most people do, in a straight line, moving steadily closer over time. They love in circles. They come near, then vanish. They open a crack, then slam the door shut again. And what makes it even more confusing is that they don't treat every person the same way. With one person, they can seem cold, shut off, almost robotic, like nothing gets through. With someone else, though, you'll catch flashes of softness, a hesitation in their voice, a tension that wasn't there a second ago, as if some part of them is actually invested. That gap between how they act with someone who barely matters and how they act with someone who really does is where the real story lives. Underneath it all, avoidants are fighting a quiet war between two things they both want and fear: connection and control. The moment they sense a relationship could actually reach them emotionally, something inside starts to panic, even if it doesn't show on the surface. One part of them is shouting to keep their distance. Another part, quieter but just as real, is terrified of losing whatever this is. That internal tug-of-war plays out in small, easy-to-miss ways. Missed mostly because the person on the other end is too busy feeling hurt by the distance to notice what's actually happening underneath it. This is exactly why so many people misread an avoidance withdrawal as proof they never cared. The logic feels obvious. If they're pulling back, I must not matter. But with avoidance, it's frequently the reverse. The more someone actually means something to them, the harder they'll fight to create space, because closeness feels like danger, not comfort. Still, not every person triggers this reaction in them. Some people are simply comfortable and low risk, good for company, good for attention, good for feeling wanted, but never anything deeper. Other people, though, hit a nerve. They become a mirror the avoidant isn't ready to look into. That's the whole subject of what we're getting into here: how avoidants think, speak, and behave differently around the person who genuinely gets to them compared to the person they just keep around. Let's start with emotional access, because that's really the first giveaway. It's not about the words coming out of their mouth, it's about what they actually let you feel from them. For an avoidant, emotion is the one thing they protect more fiercely than anything else in their life. Their history, their fears, their pain, all of it sits behind a door that stays locked for almost everyone. If you're just an option to them, that door never opens, not even a little. They'll still talk to you. They might joke around, maybe even flirt a bit. They'll hand you a version of themselves that feels close enough to keep you interested, but distant enough that they never feel exposed. Everything with them stays on the surface: safe topics, light conversation, a tone that's carefully managed so nothing slips through. You might walk away thinking you're really getting to know this person, but in truth, you're only circling the outside walls of who they are. They'll ask about your day. They'll bring up work, mention a show they like, whatever keeps things moving, but you'll notice something is consistently absent: real, emotional truth. They won't actually tell you how they feel, because when you're just an option, their goal was never connection in the first place. It's control. They want the ease of having you around without ever risking the vulnerability that comes with being truly known. They'll make you feel noticed, sure, but never actually understood. And that confusion, feeling seen but not known, can become its own kind of addiction. You keep chasing a depth they never intend to give you. But when you're their real choice, when you're the person they genuinely want, the entire atmosphere shifts. It doesn't happen with fireworks. It's subtle, almost invisible if you're not paying attention. They'll still act guarded on the outside, but something starts to seep through the cracks. A softer tone, a pause before they answer, a flicker of hesitation that used to never be there. Maybe late one night they'll bring up something small from their past, a fear they usually never mention, some fragment of themselves they typically keep locked away. It won't be dramatic or announced. It'll just feel different and you'll notice it. For them, that small moment isn't casual at all. It's a kind of surrender. It's their way, without saying the words, of telling you that you matter. Avoidants don't open up to impress anyone. They open up when staying quiet finally becomes harder than being honest. And right after they let something slip, don't be surprised if they retreat almost immediately, going quiet, acting like nothing happened, pretending the moment meant nothing. That's not indifference. That's fear doing damage control, because for one brief second, you got closer than they were prepared for. That's what real emotional access looks like with an avoidant. It's never handed out freely, and it's never faked either. If they let you glimpse even a sliver of what's behind their calm exterior, something in them has already decided that you're not just another option anymore. And here's something worth understanding about why this happens the way it does. For most people, opening up is a gradual process that feels natural once trust builds. For an avoidant, it's almost the opposite experience. Trust doesn't make vulnerability easier for them. It makes the stakes higher. The more they trust someone, the more that person has the power to actually hurt them, and that awareness alone can make an avoidant tighten up rather than relax. So when they do let something slip, when they do hand you a piece of themselves, it's rarely because they finally feel 100% safe. It's more that the pull toward you became stronger than their instinct to protect themselves. That's an important distinction, because it means their vulnerability isn't a reward you earned through good behavior. It's closer to an involuntary reaction, something that happens almost despite their better judgment, which is exactly why it tends to be followed by retreat. The nervous system that just allowed closeness immediately starts trying to undo it, to restore the distance that feels familiar and safe. Now let's talk about distance and space, because this is the part that trips up almost everyone who's ever loved someone avoidant. When they pull away, it's incredibly easy to assume you did something wrong, that you said too much, felt too much, wanted too much. But what most people don't realize is that distance from an avoidant isn't automatically rejection. Sometimes it's actually self-protection. When you're just an option in their life, their distance feels cold and effortless, almost too easy. They don't hesitate before going quiet. They're not checking your posts, not wondering how you're doing, not curious about where you've disappeared to. They just vanish, and it's not because you hurt them somehow. It's because walking away costs them absolutely nothing. There's no guilt attached, no lingering emotional residue, no unfinished business in their mind. You were simply part of a routine, something that filled empty hours or eased loneliness for a while, but it never touched anything real in them, so when they step back, it's peaceful for them. They can move forward without carrying any weight from it. That's what it looks like when you were never actually inside their emotional world to begin with. They don't need to manufacture distance from you, because real closeness was never there in the first place. But when you're their actual choice, the person they genuinely want, that same distance feels completely different to be around. They'll still pull back, but this time you can sense the internal conflict behind it. Their silence has an edge to it. Their absence carries a kind of charged energy. It almost feels like they're trying to talk themselves into not caring, while secretly keeping tabs on whether you've noticed they're gone. They might not reach out directly, but they'll linger nearby in other ways, checking your stories, glancing at whether you're online, remembering little details they act like they forgot. It's a quiet internal battle between the part of them craving safety and the part of them that wants you specifically. They'll tell themselves they just need some space to think things through, but what's really happening is they're trying to numb themselves a bit, because being close to you stirs something they can't fully control. It threatens the sense of control they've spent years building their whole identity around. So they step back, not to end anything, but just to catch their breath. And yet, even in that silence, you can usually feel that their attention hasn't actually gone anywhere. That's the tell that you're not just an option to them. Their distance carries weight. It comes with hesitation or guilt or a kind of quiet inner confusion. That's not avoidance of you as a person. That's avoidance of the feelings you stir up in them. So don't assume every silence means indifference. With avoidance, sometimes the quietest withdrawal is actually the clearest sign that you've reached a part of them they genuinely don't know how to handle yet. It also helps to understand that this kind of distance usually isn't a decision they consciously sit down and make. Most avoidants aren't calculating their withdrawal the way it might feel from the outside. It's closer to a reflex, something that fires automatically the moment closeness starts to feel like too much too fast. Think of it less like a wall going up on purpose and more like a hand pulling back from something hot before the brain even finishes registering the heat. That's part of what makes loving an avoidant so disorienting. You're often left trying to interpret a reaction that wasn't fully conscious in the first place, trying to find logic in something that was mostly instinct. And because it happens so fast and so quietly, it's easy to mistake their self-protection for a verdict on your worth, when really it was never about you at all. It was about a nervous system doing what it learned to do a long time ago, long before you ever entered the picture. Next comes emotional testing, and this one is sneaky because it almost never looks like a test in the moment. It shows up in the pauses, in the mixed signals, in moments that just don't quite add up. Avoidants don't test people with words, they test with silence. Without ever saying it directly, they're essentially asking, will you still stick around even when I'm difficult to love? When you're just an option to them, none of this testing happens. They don't need to know how much you care, because in their mind, they've already decided you're replaceable. They're not studying your reactions or running any kind of emotional calculation. Their behavior stays casual and unbothered. If you back off, they'll let you go without much thought. If you stick around, it barely registers as a difference to them. There's no curiosity, no tension, no quiet analysis happening behind the scenes, because testing someone requires actual emotional investment. And when you're just an option, that investment simply isn't there. You're part of their comfort zone, not their emotional risk zone. They can still be pleasant, attentive, even warm sometimes, but it's mechanical rather than meaningful. Nothing is really at stake in how you respond, because deep down they already know they wouldn't fall apart if you left tomorrow. But when you're their real choice, the one who's actually gotten under their skin, everything changes. That's exactly when the testing starts. They might go quiet right after a genuinely deep moment between you. They'll delay texting back longer than usual. They'll create small pockets of uncertainty just to watch how you handle it. This isn't manipulation in the calculated sense. It's fear. They're trying to confirm or deny their worst belief that people leave once they stop being easy or perfect. They need to find out if that's going to be true with you too, so they'll pull back just slightly and observe from a distance. Do you chase after them? Do you stay steady? Do you match their quiet with your own calm? Every single reaction you have becomes information their heart is quietly processing. And when you respond with steadiness instead of panic, instead of pleading or over-explaining, that's when something genuinely starts to shift inside them. Because underneath it all, these little emotional tests aren't games they're playing for fun. They're a clumsy way of trying to feel safe in love without ever having to admit out loud how scared they actually are. What they really want to know is, if I let my guard down completely, will you still choose me anyway? But they can't just come out and ask that. So instead, they push a little emotionally and wait to see what happens. That's why, with the person they truly want, their behavior often feels contradictory. Close one moment, distant the next. It's the ongoing tug of war between wanting to trust you fully and wanting to protect themselves just in case. So if you find yourself being tested by an avoidant, resist the urge to rush in and prove yourself. Their tests were never really about winning or losing. They're about safety. And when you can hold steady through their silence instead of scrambling, that's when they slowly start to believe this particular love might not wound them the way past ones did. It's worth adding here that these tests rarely come with any awareness on the avoidance part that they're even doing it. Almost nobody would describe their own behavior as testing someone. They'd describe it as needing space or being busy or just not feeling like talking that day. The testing framework only becomes visible when you zoom out and notice the pattern repeating itself around specific emotional peaks, always right after something felt too real, too close, too honest. That timing is the giveaway. It's not random distance. It's distance that shows up on cue, right when vulnerability would otherwise take root. And the reason your response matters so much in these moments isn't because you're trying to pass some kind of exam. It's because your steadiness becomes new information for a nervous system that's only ever learned one story, the story where closeness eventually leads to abandonment or engulfment. Every time you respond with calm instead of chaos, you're quietly rewriting a small piece of that story, even if it takes them a long time to consciously notice it happening. Then there's what happens when they come back, the return phase, and this part always leaves people wondering, why now, of all times? Because with avoidance, a return is never as random as it seems on the surface. Even when it looks spontaneous, they're not just showing up out of nowhere, they're circling back, quietly checking whether the emotional door they once closed is still cracked open even slightly. When you're just an option in their story, that return feels hollow, almost automatic. It arrives without any real weight behind it, no memory attached, no deeper meaning. Just a casual "hey, what's up?" or a quick reaction to something you posted. Nothing personal, nothing emotionally loaded. It's boredom or curiosity or maybe just ego, a passing thought of let's see if they're still interested. There's no tension in how they phrase things, no hesitation in their tone. They won't bring up anything specific you once shared with them because honestly, it was never stored as meaningful to begin with. Their return isn't driven by emotion. It's more like habit. They're simply checking whether the attention is still available, whether that old comfort is still on tap. It's like wandering back into a cafe you used to visit, familiar, sure, but not meaningful anymore. And if you don't respond, they'll move on without a second thought, like it never really mattered, because when you were just an option, losing your presence was never a real loss to them. It was just a convenience they could revisit whenever it suited them. But when you're their genuine choice, someone they actually felt something real for, that return carries an entirely different weight. They won't come back casually. They come back carefully, almost nervously. There's a certain charge to it, something a little tense, a little cautious. They might open with small talk, but underneath every word there's memory sitting quietly. They'll bring up something you said once, mention a detail you'd nearly forgotten yourself, or reference a place tied to something you shared together. That's the tell. Their words come with residue attached. Even if they act like the message was random, it wasn't. They thought about reaching out. They replayed old conversations in their mind. They scrolled through things, hovered over your name, reread old messages, and eventually talked themselves into sending something, not because they felt fully ready, but because they simply couldn't keep ignoring the pull anymore. And here's the deeper truth about avoidance. When they come back to someone who genuinely mattered, it isn't about seeking attention, it's about regulation. They're trying to soothe the part of themselves that still feels tethered to you, still wondering whether they're safe to approach again, or whether that window has already closed for good. So even when their message sounds light and breezy, the quiet spaces between their words are saying something much bigger, something like, "Do you still see me the way you used to?" That's the real difference between an authentic return and a recycled one. One comes from boredom passing through. The other comes from memory that refuses to fully fade. And with avoidance, memory almost always means there's emotion underneath it. So if they circle back and you can feel that quiet tension in how they're speaking, understand that it's not just a passing message. It's the echo of something they tried hard not to feel, finally finding its way back to you anyway. There's also a pattern worth noticing in how long these returns take to arrive. With someone who was only ever an option, the timeline tends to be short and reactive, days at most, often triggered by something as simple as noticing you've moved on or seeing you less active online. But with someone who was their real choice, the gap before they return is often much longer, sometimes weeks, sometimes far more, because they're not just working up the nerve to send a message. They're working through an internal negotiation, weighing the risk of reopening something against the discomfort of leaving it closed. That's why these returns can feel like they're coming out of nowhere from the outside. What actually happened was a long, quiet process that simply wasn't visible to you until the moment they finally acted on it. And that brings us to the last part, which isn't really about decoding them at all anymore. It's about coming back to yourself. Because understanding how avoidants operate was never just about memorizing their patterns for its own sake. It's really about recognizing how easy it is to lose yourself while trying so hard to understand someone who keeps running from love. Here's something worth sitting with. You cannot fix an avoidant simply by proving your worth to them over and over. You can't heal them by being endlessly patient, endlessly gentle, or endlessly available, because what they're actually running from was never you as a person. It's what being close to you makes them feel. You make them feel vulnerable, exposed, genuinely seen. And for someone who spent years constructing emotional walls brick by brick, that feeling is terrifying, not comforting. So the next time you notice you're being treated like just an option, resist the urge to chase after the confusion, trying to make sense of it. Don't try to force a connection that should be growing on its own. Don't go silent purely to provoke a reaction out of them, and don't over-explain yourself trying to convince them you're safe to trust. Real strength was never about earning someone's choice through effort. It comes from already knowing your own worth, whether or not they're able to meet you there. If they're pulling away, let them go. If they're stuck in uncertainty, don't beg them for clarity you're owed. Give yourself the closure through your own boundaries instead of waiting on theirs. Because every single time you choose to hold your ground instead of chasing down answers, you shift the entire dynamic between you. You stop being the person sitting around waiting to be valued, and you start becoming something else entirely, a mirror reflecting back the exact thing they've been avoiding their whole life: real emotional accountability. And something interesting tends to happen once you make that shift. They feel it. Avoidants may never say it out loud, but they always sense the moment your focus turns back toward yourself. Your silence starts to register differently to them, not as absence anymore, but as peace. Your calm becomes almost unsettling for them because it forces them, whether they want to or not, to confront the unrest sitting inside themselves. That's the quiet turning point where the whole dynamic flips. The same person who once ran to protect their own freedom eventually starts to feel the real weight of what they walked away from. But here's the part worth remembering above everything else. That shift was never something you were owed. And it's definitely not something you should be sitting around waiting for. Your own growth was never really about pulling them back toward you. It's about learning, deeply and permanently, that your worth was never dependent on whether they were capable of recognizing it. Once you stop chasing emotional availability from someone who's genuinely afraid of giving it, you finally make room for a different kind of love, one that's actually ready for you, consistent with you, and mutual in every sense of the word. So if you happen to be sitting in that silence right now, wondering what it all means, resist the urge to fill it with anxiety. Fill it instead with your own clarity, because the exact moment you stop proving yourself, stop chasing, and stop trying to fix what isn't yours to fix, that's the moment you step fully into your own power. And once you're standing in that kind of energy, you stop needing to be anyone's option ever again. You become fully and completely your own choice. That's really the whole path to healing after loving an avoidant. It was never about changing who they are. It's about remembering that your peace, your calm, and your boundaries were always the clearest reflection of what real love actually looks like. One last thing worth holding on to through all of this. None of what's been described here is an excuse for how you're treated, and it was never meant to be read that way. Understanding why someone pulls away doesn't obligate you to keep waiting around for them to figure themselves out. You're allowed to extend compassion towards someone's fear while still choosing not to build your life around it. Those two things can exist at the same time. You can understand exactly why an avoidant behaves the way they do and still decide that understanding isn't the same thing as accepting a relationship that leaves you constantly guessing where you stand. Real love, the kind that's actually good for you, shouldn't require a manual to interpret. It shouldn't need decoding, translating, or careful analysis just to figure out if you're wanted. So use everything here as a way to protect your own peace, not as a project to fix someone else. If they do the work themselves and grow into someone capable of real closeness, that's beautiful, and it might even happen with you. But your healing was never supposed to depend on their timeline. It only ever depended on you finally choosing yourself with the same consistency you once tried to offer them.